Thank you, Chairman Causer. So before I ask the question, I understand, Pam, there was a goat sold today for $7,000, which might be a record breaker here at Farm Show.
Wow.
So I wanted, how does that compare to a meat rabbit? Would that be similar to?
3,000, I think.
Okay.
Which was like 3 times what they expected. So.
Okay.
No more, but there's more votes.
There you go. Good. Not sure, Mark. So, Secretary, my question revolves around permitting, and we still hear of so many of our farmers trying to get a building permit for an addition to a dairy barn or a poultry house, and still taking 18 months or 2 years or longer. And when we look at you know, the dairy sector, for example, that is one of the most challenging sectors in agriculture today. And the word on the street is that after some of these dairy farmers use up their stored feeds that they have here over winter, that we might be losing 300 small dairies sometime this spring because of that depressed milk price. And then, you know, on top of the permitting issue, we have, you know, the cost of ongoing regulation, and it seems like we continue to add regulations, whether it's on the conservation side, whether it's on, you name it. Basically, there's, you know, we continue to add regulations, and some of those clearly make some good sense. But what are we doing to help assure that our Pennsylvania farmers are competitive, they can be permitted, they can get building permits? What about regulations? Have we rolled back any regulations in the last couple of years? I know we've added some. And you know, where's that whole thing going? Because we're not competitive with even our neighboring state of Maryland or New York. When we have a poultry farmer actually in representing Fees District that has farms in Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, his comment is, I will never apply for a building permit for a chicken house in Pennsylvania again, because in Maryland and Delaware, I can get those permits in 3 to 6 months, and in Pennsylvania, it can take 2 to 3 years. Somehow, we must do better. What are we doing?
Representative, thank you. I mean, this is a you know, continuing conversation. You know, it's one that it's the Department of Agriculture, it's the legislature, it's a federal government, it's a local government. We've tried to be really, you know, smart in approaching on the permitting side, certainly those things that were within the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture and the State Conservation Commission. But we know with local governments, particularly 2,500 of them, there are a lot of local decisions about land use, and we've had this conversation that even within, you know, 2 townships of the same county, you can have very, very different processes sort of employed there. That's not an answer. I'm just saying that that's part of this puzzle of how do you parse out what we do, what we as a department do, what do we do, you know, as a larger government, and certainly the legislative body. We have to make sure that we are competitive. I would say that, right? My point of sensitivity to the folks in the poultry industry, when I hear those statements, I would just say, please look at the infrastructure of Pennsylvania and consider the access you have to an animal health infrastructure you heard Dr. Wolfgang speak of. relative to the access that you would have in the state of Maryland and the state of Delaware is one example, right? You have to look at this thing pretty comprehensively. Is that you don't dismiss that, because I think that is also, when there are problems like we've had with high-path AI, I would much rather have the state of Pennsylvania responding. There are more farms in Lancaster County than there are in the entire state of Delaware. Now, in all due respect to my friends in Delaware, right, that is a major statement. And just in terms of process, 3 counties in the state of Delaware. But I don't want to miss your point that there's more we can do. We've got to be sensitive to it. We've got to be smart about it. How do we interface both from a permitting standpoint, what can you do? I think there's some good work being done by DEP. There's been some good work done by the DCED in regards to that. But we've got to keep working at how to expedite the process, right? If we believe that the permit's required, how do you expedite the process? And what we have find ourselves with, we have requirements for permits that the department didn't administratively create, right? They are required to be done. And then how do you execute that? And there's where I think the conversation for all of us is how do we do that and do that most effectively when we know that we have townships that want to be involved, conservation districts that want to be involved, counties that want to be involved. It's a very tactile place, right? Everybody's got to touch everything. And this is a great example of that. But we've got to be sensitive to it. The second part, just in the competitiveness, listen, I worry more every day about dairy than I've worried when I had my own cows. I really worry. We're in a time when this world, from a dairy perspective, is incredibly difficult, very difficult, right? And this realization that the balance between what's produced and what's consumed matters a great deal. And we were hopeful that as we entered 2018 that we would see some uptick in dairy prices. I mean, at this point, there's still hope there, but they're not as strong a signal as we had hoped or had seen in late 2017. Now, that's not a result of Pennsylvania's production or even U.S. production. It's what's happening with the European Union and some decisions that they made and what they're putting onto the market that are direct competition to American products and Pennsylvania products. It is the uncertainty created by NAFTA, and it was in Canada 3 weeks ago, reassuring our number one buying country that Pennsylvania likes our relationship with Ontario, right? It's $1.2 billion of agricultural products that flow to Canada out of Pennsylvania. Agricultural products. The other $800 million flows south to Mexico. So when we talk about NAFTA and renegotiating NAFTA, talk to the former Secretary of Agriculture who was in Mexico. And the New Zealand and Australia were already in Mexico offering U.S. prices delivered from New Zealand for the same competitive products that we can move out of the state of Pennsylvania and Mexico. That's the world, right? That's the market. That's the craziness. That's the competitiveness, right? And I put all of that on the table. So it's a business plan, competitive plan, a good workforce, a solid market. And there are things that I think collectively we would agree that are all part of this equation about a competitive dairy industry or a competitive agriculture. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and you're right. I mean, there's, the dairy industry is really in dire straits. The whole idea of finding a way to permit sooner and also roll back regulations, I think we're going to have to do if we're going to be competitive. So I'll ask just one follow-up question, and that is, are there any regulations that we've actually rolled back or in recent times in agriculture that you can think of?
I mean, there have been some things that we've taken off the books. I mean, I can get you that list. The short answer is yes, there are. Recent things that in the last year or two that are impacting the competitiveness of agriculture, dairy industry, not that I can think of. We've added a lot, by the way. That's part of my worry. I mean, half of our legal team is working on regulations, but nothing we've taken off.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary.